Black Boy Saves Billionaire from Fire. Millionaire's astonishing act will surprise you. The night was shrouded in an oppressive darkness, the air thick with a choking black smoke that hung low like a curtain of death. The quiet was unnerving, a silence broken only by the distant crackling of flames and the faint wail of sirens slicing through the night. On the horizon, an inferno blazed, and at its heart was a mansion, grand in stature but now reduced to a tower of destruction. The fire surged forwards, devouring the opulent structure with cruel efficiency as if it were a ravenous beast. Inside the mansion, the situation was dire. Jonathan Hayes, tall, striking, and wealthy beyond measure, was trapped on the second floor. His signature suit, now torn and singed, clung to his frame. He stood at the window, frantically calling out, his voice hoarse with panic as the fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming everything in its path. The mansion, a symbol of his success, was crumbling before his eyes, and there was no clear escape. The air grew thick with smoke, each breath burning in his chest, and every second felt like an eternity. His once calm demeanor had long since cracked, replaced with desperation. Outside, the scene was equally chaotic. Tyler, a boy no older than 16, raced through the narrow streets, his torn clothes barely hanging on him. His face, streaked with dirt, was a mask of fear and determination, his eyes wide with urgency, fixed on the distant flames. Something in his gut told him this fire was more than just an accident. It was an emergency, a life-or-death moment. Tyler's heart pounded, his chest tight with the weight of an instinct he couldn't ignore. As he approached the mansion, the heat from the flames seemed to push back against him, trying to force him away, but Tyler refused to falter. His mind focused solely on the burning structure ahead. His feet barely touched the ground as he sprinted toward the mansion, the world around him fading into the background. The crackling fire and the chaos of sirens blended into a blur as he raced forward, each step carrying him closer to the unimaginable danger. Inside, the fire raged on, but Tyler heard something else, a faint sound that sent a shiver down his spine. A cry. A desperate, choking call for help. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his heart urged him to act. He darted through the front door, ignoring the stinging heat as it clawed at his skin. The smoke hit him like a wall, dense and suffocating, but he refused to stop. He pushed forward, his eyes watering from the intensity, his every breath burning in his lungs. His thoughts were a blur. Only one thing mattered now, saving whoever was inside. And as he moved through the thickening haze, his legs feeling like lead, Tyler saw the silhouette of a man standing at a second-floor window, waving his arms frantically. Jonathan Hayes. He was trapped. Tyler's pulse surged, a wave of adrenaline flooding his system, but there was no time to hesitate. He raced up the staircase, the wooden steps creaking under his weight, his muscles burning with each movement. The fire seemed to close in from every side, the heat intensifying with each step. But Tyler pushed through, ignoring the screams of his body as he ascended. When he reached the second floor, the heat was unbearable, but Tyler's focus remained unshaken. Jonathan's eyes met his, wide with fear, his face streaked with soot. "Help me!" Jonathan screamed, his voice barely audible over the roaring flames. Without a second thought, Tyler reached out and grabbed Jonathan's arm, pulling him toward the window. The room around them was a furnace, the walls blackened with soot and smoke. They both staggered toward the window, Tyler's heart hammering in his chest. The flames were so close now, licking at the edges of the building, and the sounds of collapsing wood filled the air. With everything he had left, Tyler pulled Jonathan through the window, the two of them clinging to each other for support. The heat outside was no better, but there was no choice but to move. A ladder had been set up by emergency responders, and Tyler urged Jonathan to climb, pushing him toward the safety of the ground below. They moved quickly, the roaring fire behind them, the roof above beginning to collapse with a deafening crash. Just as the flames threatened to swallow the last remnants of the mansion, both men reached the ladder, their escape secured, but only by mere moments. As they descended, the fire continued to rage, the mansion now little more than a silhouette of destruction. The heat was intense, the smoke thick enough to obscure the moon above, but Tyler and Jonathan were alive, their breaths ragged and their bodies trembling. Tyler's heart raced, not just from the physical exertion, but from the realization of what he had done. He had saved a life. In that moment, the world seemed to shift. What had once been an ordinary night for Tyler, full of struggles and challenges, was now forever marked by an extraordinary act of bravery. Jonathan Hayes, once the powerful, untouchable millionaire, stood beside him, alive because of a young boy who had no reason to risk his life, except that he could. As the fire continued to rage behind them, both men knew that their lives had been changed forever, bound together by a fire that nearly consumed them both, but which, in the end, had forged an unexpected bond. As the fire trucks arrived, their blaring sirens cutting through the chaos, Tyler stood outside, his chest heaving with exhaustion, the weight of what had just transpired slowly sinking in. The fire was finally contained, the furious flames that had consumed the mansion now reduced to smoldering embers. The intense heat that had once seemed so overwhelming was now just a distant memory. But Tyler could still feel the burn in his lungs and the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He stood there, gazing at the wreckage of the mansion, unable to shake the disbelief that had settled over him. The world around him felt surreal. Just hours ago, he was a teenager living a life of struggle, ignored by society. And now, he had saved Jonathan Hayes, the millionaire, the man whose face was plastered across news broadcasts and whose name had been a fixture in every magazine Tyler had ever seen. It felt impossible that the boy who had once dreamed of a better life was now standing side by side with the man who seemed to have everything. Tyler's heart was still racing when Jonathan approached him, his steps slow but steady, his face marked by soot and exhaustion. He paused a few feet away, his eyes locking with Tyler's in a gaze full of gratitude. The fire had left Jonathan shaken, but it had also left him in awe of the young boy who had risked everything to save him. There was a depth in Jonathan's eyes that Tyler had never seen before, a depth that went beyond wealth, fame, and power. It was the kind of look someone gives when they realize how fragile life is and how easily it can be lost. British-Scottish politician Jaime Sink. Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and then spoke, his voice still trembling slightly from the ordeal. "I don't know what to say," he began, his words coming out in a low, gravelly tone. "You saved my life. No one else could have done what you just did. You're a hero." Tyler's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and humility. He had never been one for attention, never wanted the spotlight. "I just did what anyone would do," he mumbled, shifting his feet nervously. He could feel the weight of Jonathan's words pressing on him, but he didn't know how to respond. All he had done was what felt right in the moment, what his heart had told him to do. Jonathan paused for a moment, his eyes never leaving Tyler's. There was a look of genuine admiration in his gaze, a recognition of the courage and selflessness that this young boy had shown. But as Jonathan took a step forward, his expression shifted, becoming more serious, more intent. "I want to make sure you're taken care of," he said, his voice now firm, with a sense of purpose behind it. "No one does something like this without being rewarded." Tyler blinked, confused by the offer. He had never sought anything from Jonathan, or anyone for that matter. The idea of reward felt foreign to him. He had simply acted because it was the right thing to do, because someone needed help, and he was the only one who could provide it. "I wasn't looking for a reward, sir," he replied, shaking his head. "I just didn't want you to die." Jonathan's resolve remained unwavering. His gaze softened, but his voice was determined. "You saved my life, Tyler. That's something that doesn't happen every day, and I don't forget people like you. I'm going to make sure you're rewarded. You deserve it." Tyler didn't know how to process what Jonathan was saying. His heart raced again, but not from fear or excitement. This was something deeper, something confusing. He had grown up in a world that had never offered him much. A reward, a gesture of kindness, wasn't something he had ever expected from anyone. It was a foreign concept, one that left him feeling uncomfortably exposed. He was a boy from a world of struggle, not someone who could ever imagine a life filled with the kind of rewards Jonathan Hayes was offering. But Jonathan wasn't finished. He took another step closer, his eyes searching Tyler's face, as if trying to communicate something deeper, something beyond the words. "Tyler," he said quietly, his tone softer now, "what you did tonight wasn't just brave. It was something rare. I can't let someone like you slip through the cracks of this world without giving you a chance. You've got a future ahead of you, and I want to make sure you have the opportunity to take it. I'm not just talking about money or fame. I'm talking about giving you the chance to create a life for yourself, a life you deserve." Tyler felt his breath catch in his throat, a mixture of emotions swirling inside him. He had never dreamed that something like this could happen to him. Someone who had spent most of his life being overlooked, ignored, and forgotten. Yet here he was, standing face to face with the very person whose wealth and success seemed so unattainable, and Jonathan was offering him something more precious than all the money in the world. A chance. Tyler swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. He had always fought for survival, for a way out of his circumstances, but never had he imagined someone like Jonathan Hayes offering him a way in. A way into a life he had only dreamed of. And yet, as Tyler looked into Jonathan's eyes, he realized something deeper. This wasn't just about a reward or a chance at a better life. This was about human connection, about the bond forged in the flames of the fire. Jonathan Hayes, a man of power and privilege, had seen something in him, a boy who had nothing but his courage, and for the first time in his life, Tyler understood that the world wasn't just about what you had, but who you were, and what you were willing to give. "I don't know what to say," Tyler murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Jonathan just smiled, the weight of the night lifting from his shoulders, knowing that Tyler was no longer just a hero. He was someone who had earned his place in a world that had never given him a chance. The two stood there, amidst the wreckage of the mansion and the remnants of the fire, not as stranger and benefactor, but as two people whose lives had been irrevocably altered by an act of courage. And in that moment, both of them knew that whatever happened next, the bond between them would never fade. Days passed, and Tyler did his best to return to the rhythm of his normal life. The world had gone back to its usual hustle and bustle, and though he had been hailed as a hero by the media and community, Tyler brushed off the attention as best as he could. He wasn't someone who sought the spotlight or the praise. It had never been about the recognition for him. He had acted on instinct, trying to save a life in the heat of the moment, and now he just wanted to go back to his quiet existence. The excitement of the fire, the adrenaline of the rescue, and the gratitude of Jonathan Hayes seemed like distant memories, fading with each passing day. Jonathan had thanked him, of course, but Tyler didn't expect anything beyond that. He had done what anyone with a heart would have done. The attention was nice, but it wasn't why he had acted. Besides, people like Jonathan Hayes, people with power, wealth, and influence, lived in a different world, a world that Tyler knew he could never be a part of. He had been raised in an apartment with peeling walls, with only his mother to care for him, and while she had always done her best, they lived paycheck to paycheck. Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that his place in the world was forever destined to be on the fringes, far from the kind of life Jonathan led. He had moved on, focusing on his studies, helping his mum with errands, and trying to ignore the headlines that kept mentioning his name. Everything returned to normal, or so he thought. One afternoon, as he sat in the cramped apartment he shared with his mother, doing his homework at the kitchen table, he heard the sound of a truck pulling up outside. It was loud, rumbling, and out of place in the otherwise quiet neighborhood. Tyler glanced out the window, distracted for a moment. The truck didn't belong to anyone in their building. It was sleek, polished, with a logo he didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued, Tyler stood up, walking to the door as a large man in a suit approached. The man was well-dressed, with a sharp suit and sunglasses that made him look imposing. He held a massive envelope, thick and heavy, as if it contained something of great importance. He knocked on the door, and when Tyler answered, the man looked at him with a businesslike demeanor. "Is this the residence of Tyler James?" the man asked, his voice low and formal. Tyler, still a little confused, nodded. "Yeah, that's me." The man handed him the envelope with a brisk motion. "Sign here," he instructed, and Tyler took the pen, his hand still shaking a little from the surrealness of the situation. He scribbled his name on the line and took the package, watching as the man turned and walked away without another word. Tyler stood frozen for a moment, the envelope feeling heavy in his hands. It was unexpected. He hadn't been expecting anything else from Jonathan. He carefully tore it open, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, there was a letter, its thick paper sturdy and crisp. Tyler pulled it out first, scanning the familiar handwriting that belonged to Jonathan Hayes. The letter began with a simple, heartfelt message. "Tyler, I can never thank you enough for saving my life that night. What you did for me is something I will never forget." But it was the next part of the letter that nearly stopped Tyler's heart. As he read, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Apropos, as a token of my gratitude, I'm sending you something that will change your life. You are a true hero, Tyler, and I will forever be indebted to you." Tyler blinked, his breath catching in his throat as he read on. The letter was beautifully written, but what caught his eye was the next sentence. "Enclosed is a check for $5 million. This is not just a reward. It is my way of ensuring that you have the opportunity to build the life you deserve." His hand trembled as he pulled out the check from the envelope. It was as if the words on the paper weren't real. $5 million. The number seemed to blur before his eyes as he struggled to make sense of it. It was a sum so large it felt like it couldn't possibly be meant for him. He looked again, just to be sure. Yes, it was real. There, in bold numbers, was the amount that would change everything. Tyler collapsed into the nearest chair, his legs giving way beneath him. He stared at the check in his hands, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. The letter continued, but Tyler's mind had already gone into overdrive. $5 million. He had read it 1,000 times, but the weight of the reality still hadn't sunk in. It was more than he had ever imagined for himself, more than his mother had ever dreamed of. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears as he processed the words. "This is a token of my gratitude. You are a true hero." It all felt like a dream, something that could only happen to someone else, someone who lived in a world far removed from his own. But here it was, right in his hands, and he could feel the crystal dazzle his eyes. All other items of her gear had been removed. Tyler's fingers trembled as he held the check up to the light, staring at the bold signature of Jonathan Hayes at the bottom. This wasn't just money. It was a new beginning. He could see it now. A chance to escape the small apartment, to offer his mother a life free from financial struggle, to go after his own dreams without the weight of constant worry. But more than that, it was proof that one small act of bravery could forever change the course of a life. His chest tightened as he thought about what it meant, how the fire, the rescue, and his decision to act on impulse had led to this moment. Tyler didn't know what to do next. He wasn't sure how to process the enormity of the gift, but one thing was clear. His life was never going to be the same again. And deep down, Tyler knew that this wasn't just about the money. It was about a man who saw something in him that he had never seen in himself. A chance for a future that was full of possibilities. He felt a surge of emotion, a mix of gratitude and disbelief, wash over him. This was his moment, his life-changing moment, and he would never forget it. The arrival of the $5 million was nothing short of a miracle. It came at a time when Tyler's family had been struggling for years, their lives dictated by the limitations of their circumstances. They had been living in a cramped, run-down apartment in a neighborhood that was slowly falling apart. With broken sidewalks and graffiti-covered walls, every day felt like a battle, just to make ends meet, just to get through the next bill. His mother had worked 2 jobs, often sacrificing her own needs to ensure Tyler had what he needed. But it had never been enough to pull them out of the cycle of financial strain. 1. Now, though, the world felt different. Tyler used a portion of the money to pay off the looming debts that had hung over their heads for years, clearing away the constant stress of unpaid bills. It was like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He immediately secured a new home for his family, a house in a peaceful suburban neighborhood where the sun seemed to shine brighter. The apartment they had lived in, with its creaky floors and peeling paint, felt like a distant memory now. His mother's eyes welled up with tears when she saw the new house, a place she had only ever dreamed of. Tyler had taken her by the hand and led her into the home, her voice cracking as she whispered, "You did this for us, Tyler. You really did it." But it wasn't just about the house or the debt. It was the future. Tyler enrolled in a prestigious college, a place he had only ever imagined walking through. He was now a student at a university that seemed a world away from the small, local high school he had attended. The money had opened doors, and for the first time in his life, Tyler felt like he had a chance to build a future, one that was no longer constrained by financial limitations. Yet, as much as the money had brought freedom, it had also begun to bring complications. Tyler could feel the shift in how people treated him. Those who had once ignored him or barely acknowledged his presence suddenly seemed to find value in him. Former classmates, who had never spared him a second glance, were now reaching out to him, offering their friendship, or, more accurately, their favors, invitations to parties, requests to hang out, even suggestions for business ventures began to flood in. It was as if his worth was no longer measured by who he was, but by what he had. Tyler was conflicted. He had always been a humble person, rooted in the lessons his mother had taught him about hard work, perseverance, and kindness. He knew that money didn't change the essence of who he was, but others didn't see it that way. Some friends, who had never been there for him before, were now treating him like a lottery ticket. Their intentions were unclear. Was it friendship, or just a chance to get something from him? It was hard to tell who truly cared about him and who saw him as a means to an end. Tyler found himself growing distant from some of the people he had once called friends, unsure of their motives. It was painful at times. He didn't want to lose the connections he had built, but he also couldn't ignore the subtle shift in dynamics. He had never asked for this kind of attention, and it made him uneasy. Despite the changes in his relationships, there was one person who remained a constant presence in Tyler's life, Jonathan Hayes. Over the weeks and months following the fire, Jonathan had reached out, offering not only his gratitude but also his guidance. They met occasionally for lunch or coffee, and Jonathan made a genuine effort to mentor Tyler. The bond between them, forged in the fire of that night, had only grown stronger. Jonathan had wealth, experience, and a deep understanding of the world Tyler was now a part of, and he was determined to make sure Tyler didn't make the same mistakes many people in his position did. Jonathan shared insights into managing wealth, investing wisely, and keeping a level head in the face of newfound success. He made sure Tyler understood that the money could easily slip through his fingers if he wasn't careful. Tyler listened intently, grateful for the advice and for Jonathan's interest in helping him navigate his new life. Jonathan's influence gave him the confidence to make informed decisions, to be cautious but also ambitious, and to stay grounded despite the sudden whirlwind of attention and opportunity. But the wealth didn't come without its challenges. Tyler found himself constantly on guard, questioning the motives of people around him, unsure of who had his best interests at heart. He was aware of how people looked at him differently now, some with envy, some with admiration, and some with expectations. It was a strange feeling, knowing that the very thing that had brought him comfort and security was also the thing that made him a target for people with their own agendas. Tyler remained focused on his goals, helping his mother, building a future for himself, and staying true to the values he had always held dear. But it wasn't easy. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the money had changed more than just his material circumstances. It had shifted the way people interacted with him, and it had opened doors to a world that was both thrilling and overwhelming. In the end, Tyler knew that he had to keep his heart in the right place. He couldn't let the wealth and the people who came with it define him, and with Jonathan Hayes by his side, guiding him, Tyler hoped that he could stay true to who he was, no matter how much the world around him had changed. Years passed, and Tyler had transformed in ways he never imagined possible. The once dirt-poor teenager who had raced into a burning mansion to save a stranger's life was now standing on stage at a prestigious charity gala, surrounded by the elite. The event was hosted by none other than Jonathan Hayes, the billionaire whose life he had saved all those years ago. The gala hall was filled with the sound of clinking glasses, soft chatter, and the elegant hum of classical music playing in the background. The atmosphere was one of wealth and sophistication, but, for Tyler, it was a reminder of just how far he had come. As Tyler took the stage to accept the award for his outstanding work in the community, his heart raced with pride. He had made a name for himself, not just as a recipient of a large sum of money, but as someone who had used his newfound wealth to better the world around him. His projects had empowered countless individuals in his hometown, giving them a chance at a better life. He had created scholarships for underprivileged students, funded small businesses, and supported local charities. Tyler had become an influential figure in his own right, respected for his philanthropic efforts and admired for his humility. But as he stood there, holding the award in his hands, he couldn't help but think back to the fire that had changed everything. That night had set off a chain of events that had completely altered the course of his life. It wasn't just the money that had been given to him, it was the opportunity, the chance to rewrite his future, and it had been more than just a stroke of luck. It had been a moment of destiny where a boy's bravery led to a door opening that no one could have predicted. Tyler scanned the room as he spoke, but his eyes inevitably found Jonathan across the crowd. Jonathan was standing near the back, clapping and beaming with pride, his once shaken face now filled with admiration for the man Tyler had become. It was in that moment that Tyler realized just how much Jonathan had impacted his life, not just by saving him from the fire, but by continuing to mentor him. By showing him what it meant to use wealth and influence for good. Jonathan had been more than just a benefactor. He had been a guide, a friend, and someone who had genuinely cared about Tyler's growth. Tyler smiled at Jonathan, and Jonathan's eyes softened in return, a silent exchange of gratitude and understanding passing between them. It was a look that spoke volumes, a shared recognition of the journey they had both been on together. One that had begun with a life saved and a promise kept, and had blossomed into something much greater than either of them had anticipated. As Tyler stepped off the stage, his thoughts remained on the lessons he had learned throughout the years. He had been given the rare opportunity to change his circumstances, but more importantly, he had been given the tools to change the world around him. The money had been just a small part of the equation. What truly mattered was the chance to make a difference in the lives of others, to be a source of inspiration and hope. He wasn't just the boy who saved a billionaire anymore. He was now a man who had the power to change lives, to impact his community, and to leave a legacy that went beyond wealth and success. In the years that followed, Tyler became a well-known advocate for social change, often sharing his story with others as a source of inspiration. He reminded people that true success wasn't about how much money you made or how many accolades you collected. It was about the difference you made, the lives you touched, and the opportunities you gave others to rise above their circumstances. But that night, at the gala, as Tyler stood in the glow of his accomplishments, he understood something that had eluded him before. It was Jonathan Hayes who had given him that first chance. And now, as he looked at the room full of people whose lives had been positively affected by his own efforts, Tyler realized the full extent of that gift. It was more than just the wealth. It was the chance to pay it forward, to take the lessons learned from his own struggle and success, and to build a better future for others. In that moment, as he caught Jonathan's gaze once again, Tyler felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. His life had been irrevocably changed by the fire, but it had also been reshaped by the choices he made in the years that followed. He was no longer just a boy from the streets. He was a man who had used his opportunities to lift others, and in doing so, had created a legacy that would last far beyond the riches that had once seemed so important. And, as he looked out at the crowd, Tyler knew that this was only the beginning. There was still so much more he could do, so many lives he could touch.